Uffington are some of the finest gardens anywhere in the world. For me, it's about getting in amongst the wonderful plants that flourish in this country and sharing the passion of the people who tend them.
However, there is another way to enjoy a garden. And that's to get up above it.
I love ballooning because you get to see the world below in a whole new light.
From up here, you get a real sense of how the garden sits in the landscape, how the terrain and the climate has shaped it. And I want you to share that experience with me.
This is a day that promises wonderful flying weather and a chance to see one of Britain's most wonderful counties.
We're exploring Oxfordshire today, and despite being one of the most densely populated counties in the country, it still remains mainly rural.
Oxfordshire lies in the south, bordered by Gloucestershire to the west and Buckinghamshire to the east. Being landlocked, Oxfordshire is furthest from the paths of most Atlantic depressions, with their cloud, wind and rain, so the climate is relatively calm, perfect in fact for ballooning and gardening.
The geography of Oxfordshire is very varied. In the north we have the rich redlands, and in the west the beautiful Cotswolds.
And slap bang in the middle of the county is that ancient seat of learning, Oxford University.
But I'm here to see the gardens.
Today I'm dropping in on 2 Oxfordshire gardens, begun by formidable women whose legacy is now under the guardianship of the next generation.
Now, you worked with Miss Havergal. What was it like during that period?
She could be very, very strict. Big farmers would be quite frightened of her.
We'll be messing about on the river at Henley-on-Thames, where your knees might come under some scrutiny.
Women at the regatta are always expected to wear a dress, and the dress has to be below the knee, otherwise they will be told to leave.
And I do a bit of inspection myself.
Go on, how many manky ones have you got? Have you got a manky one? Oh, look, you've got one. Yeah. One each.
You caught me.
One each.
From my bird's eye view in the sky, I'm looking out for a very special 8 acres. And there they are, Waterperry House and Gardens, one of Britain's first ever horticultural school for women. Waterperry Gardens lie close to the eastern border of the county. This grand house in the grounds was not only a school, it was home to the Waterperry girls, the first generation of women horticulturists who studied here. Most of the garden I'll be visiting today lies south of the house. Here the relaxed landscaping becomes more formal and structured. Vistas lead you through to intimate and peaceful spaces, like this one, the Tudor-inspired formal garden. Or if you follow your nose, you'll find yourself tipsy with the scent in the Mary Rose garden. But, high as I am, one feature of this garden stands out above all others.
One of the most exciting things about viewing Waterperry from above is that you can see the vast amount of colour that's down there. The borders just rippling along the walls, the intensity of the colour from the trials beds, all brought together with passion, and I can't wait to get down there. I enjoy coming to Waterperry because of the connection of women and gardening. It was a school, and for me, having been in education myself, that's very important. It's the standards, it's the love. Every time you come, you feel an intimacy, a special atmosphere within this garden. Plants, people and education coming together to create a very beautiful garden.
The Waterperry Gardening School was started by this towering lady. Beatrice Havergal. Beatrice was a passionate gardener and a woman of formidable determination. Her dream of establishing a horticultural school for girls came to fruition here in 1932. Students would undergo 2 years of rigorous training and leave with the cherished Waterperry diploma. During the Second World War, Waterperry became a market garden for much-needed food production and accommodating members of the Women's Land Army. They were soon put to work ploughing and digging for victory. Miss Havergal, dressed as always with a smartly knotted tie, cut a singular figure, and she had two very distinct ambitions. One was her principle of achieving horticultural excellence. Lines had to be straight, plants correctly planted. Secondly, she believed in sharing and passing on the knowledge and the opening up of opportunities for women. When one student told her that she would be leaving to get married, Miss Havergal cried, "But what about the garden?" Miss Havergal retired and sold Waterperry in 1971 to the School of Economic Science, and she died 9 years later, aged 79. Her legacy not only lives on through this beautiful garden, but through the thousands of girls who studied under her. One such girl is Mary Spiller, who continued Miss Havergal's work at Waterperry after she died. I'll be meeting her later. She in turn trained and continues to influence the latest custodian of the garden, horticultural manager Rob Jacobs, who's working in Waterperry's orchards.
Hi, Rob. I thought it was you down here. How are you?
I'm all right.
I can see you picking. Do you want a hand?
Yeah. Well, we got you a bag.
Oh, right,
Sorry.
great. Let's cross it over and do this.
Yes. Arm through there.
Head through.
The bottom one.
That's it.
That's it.
I remember these from old days. Aye.
Right, where are we going to start?
Here we are. Gentle, tender, loving care.
No fingers.
You cup the apple
Yes.
and you rotate it up. So there's no damage and everything's hunky-dory.
What you don't want is to use your fingertips.
Right.
And if you ever bite into an apple and there's a little bruise, you put your fingers to it and you can see. And you know, when we're picking, it happens, and Chris, our fruit man, he has to come out and he has a little rant at everybody. They're not using their hand, not rolling it up. So if you can feel pressure on your fingertips, you're picking the apple wrong.
Waterperry is pretty famous for its apples. They have over 5 acres of orchards and grow around 60 varieties for eating, pressing and cider making. It's no wonder Rob takes so much care with the fruit. As a custodian, he has a very strong tradition to uphold.
In a magazine called The Fruit Goer,
Yeah.
in the 70s, they said the 5 most influential people for growing fruit in the last 100 years,
Yeah.
4 men,
And one woman.
Beatrice Havergal.
There you go, you see.
For many years, Miss Havergal won gold medals at the Chelsea Flower Show for exhibit of one particular fruit, the strawberry. Is there a fruit more evocative of a British summer than a strawberry? I don't think so. It's actually a member of the rose family, and its wild cousins were found all over the temperate world. It was the crossbreeding of these wild strawberries that give us the succulent, sweet fruits we eat today. Summer fruiting varieties are the largest and most popular. They have a short but heavy cropping period over 2 to 3 weeks. But planting different varieties can provide you with a crop from early to late summer. Pick them when they're bright red all over and eat them at room temperature, because this is when they're at the most tasty.
What was it like working here as a youngster?
I was a young man.
Yeah.
It was slightly scary. At the time, the 2 ladies who did my job, Mary Spiller
Yeah.
and a lovely lady called Jean Manger, but you had to do things their way.
But what's it like being bossed by women?
Do you know, I've never seen it like that, and it's only because they're right.
No, you did say it's only because they're right.
I've got 2 daughters and a wife at home, so it's good for me to say that.
Get these in here then.
Right. careful and steady.
Yeah,
If you release side that,
I've done this before, you know.
you
see.
can come here again, you know, Christine.
Hey, can I have a job?
Yeah.
As she goes, because you don't want to bruise them. You know, you just withdraw it gently, and there you are, you see. Oh, was there a offending soul in there? Well, you're never going to get it absolutely right. I mean, go on, how many manky ones have you got? Have you got a manky one? Oh, look, you've got one. Yeah. One each.
You caught me.
One each. So how many apple varieties have you got here?
Well, on site we've got about 63.
Right.
But we've actually got a tree that we call our little family tree.
Yeah.
It's a bit more than a family tree. Nearly all the varieties of apples.
On one tree?
Yeah. Do you
Go
want
on,
to see?
yeah, come on, let's go and have a shifty. Blimey, there's a lot of different varieties on this.
Do you like it? It's
Yeah.
Just to show how clever we are. It's
Yeah.
our family tree.
Great, so a lot of different grafting being going on here.
Yeah.
Grafting, where a section of stem with leaf buds from one variety is inserted into part of a tree, is a horticultural technique. You combine one tree's best qualities with the roots of another tree that offers vigour and resilience.
Apple is Matus domesticus.
Yeah.
It has the most forgiving, stretchy, cambion layer of any tree.
So
if
the
you wanna
bark-
do something clever, yeah, that
the
bark,
bark,
the green
yeah,
bit underneath.
yeah.
You want to do anything clever, do it with Matus domesticus.
Right.
It's wonderful.
Grafting is an ancient skill. The Chinese were performing grafts over 4,000 years ago, before the knowledge travelled across the continent to Europe. This 25-year-old mother tree is a variety called Spartan, but has approximately 50 other varieties growing from it.
If you look in here, we'll pull that out of the way. Can you see the
Oh,
split in
yeah,
the bark?
yeah, yeah.
You can see that there.
Yeah, that's
the
been
old
where he's...
bark,
Yeah, and
this
that's
is
the
all
new...
the fuse.
Yeah,
And that's your new
the new
bramble.
branch. And how old would that be then?
Well, this is quite vigorous. I think they're now grafts onto grafts.
Okay,
So this
right.
would be about 3 to 4 years. We've been doing it
Yeah,
about 7
okay,
years now.
right.
One of our local varieties
Yeah.
is Oxford Beauty here.
All right.
That's doing all right.
Well, it's all right, that,
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
not
Yeah,
too bad.
yeah.
We also have Encham dumpling down there.
I can see
Right,
that,
back,
yeah.
You can see that's
Yeah.
the weak one.
Yeah.
On the other side, there's Old Fred. It's Old
Oh, I
Fred
can
Wasting.
see that. Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
Old Fred Wasting, he was the man that actually bred all these Oxford varieties, or most of these Oxford varieties. We've even got a little orchard of them. Just a few trees standing.
lovely,
Oh,
yeah.
it's keeping that genetic material in the county.
Absolutely.
Before buying Waterperry, Miss Havergal ran another small garden, and to make ends meet, she'd sell the produce at a local market. Times may have changed, but the ambition of bringing affordable local food to the people of Oxford has been grasped by a new breed of producers in a unique way. This is Cultivate. Cultivate is a cooperative which sells fruit and vegetables from its farm directly to the public. This is one of several vans that they have operating in the city.
Thank you. Bye, see you soon. Bye.
But what they sell comes from here, a 10-acre community farm. Over £80,000 was raised 3 years ago to rent the land and fund the start-up costs. Now, nearly 400 members and volunteers support the co-op with their time and hard work. Tracy Jones is one of them.
Community farms are absolutely brilliant in that they bring people onto the land that haven't got their own land but can just have the opportunity to come out on odd days and experience what it's like to grow food and harvest food. So it's really, really important to bring people into farming that wouldn't necessarily get a chance to do it.
It's an Oxford-based farm and a number of the members are very well educated. One of the founders, Joe Hassel, is a former philosophy, politics and economics student.
I came to Oxford to study, and in my undergraduate days I did nothing to do with horticulture or food production. I just really got into gardening and I carried on to do a horticultural apprenticeship.
The benefits of this type of food production are abundant.
One great thing about local food economies is the variety you get in in every aspect. I mean, we're growing 5 or 6 different varieties of tomato in this little polytunnel. So you get your punnet tomatoes, and it's not one cherry, you've got 5 different cherry tomato varieties, and I think people really appreciate that. Makes you engage with your food, makes you think about it, makes you cook it differently, makes you taste it differently.
Today, volunteer Nico O'Brien is harvesting veg for sale later in the vans.
I'm picking peppers, and I'm aiming for the bigger ones rather than the small ones, because some of them can still grow. So right now they're going in this little box, and then taken onto the veg van, where they'll be sold in various stops around Oxford.
But the farm is also educational, and it's a great way of teaching kids about the food they eat and where it comes from.
And then this one, do you want to grab this one? And so you're trying to do it without pulling out the other ones. So if you hold it by the root, that's it. It's a bit easier, I find. Yeah! Champion Beatrice, look at that. That's very good.
Once picked, the produce is then distributed to the veg vans, where an appreciative and hungry clientele awaits.
Star of the show is these, which Maya calls sweetie tomatoes, and some really nice blueberries. We've got some beetroots, so I'm just going to experiment with some beetroots and halloumi, and from Cultivate's own farm, some really nice peppers.
At the moment, the tomatoes are flying off the shelves. There's really juicy little yellow tomatoes, which are really sweet, so they're great. Beans, chard, spinach, everything just looks so delicious as well, all spread out on the van. Everyone's like, oh yeah, I'll have a bit of that, have a bit of that.
It's been a real journey for me in terms of discovering what is actually available in the local area. And it means that I can also take the next generation along, my daughter, to see how stuff is grown. And that's also really great for her, because that was a bit of a mystery for me as a kid, I think.
I think it's really nice that you can get to know your local veg van driver, and they're like your link to the farm, and you can find out what they've been growing, what they're planning to put in the ground for next week. It's great. You can see where your food's come from.
I couldn't agree more. Delicious, locally grown fruit and veg is what we're all looking for, and here it is, right on the doorstep. Miss Havergal would certainly have approved. Becoming a custodian to someone else's life's work could become a great burden. But in former Waterperry student Mary Spiller's safe hands, the gardens continue to flourish. Now a sprightly 90-year-old, to this day Mary still tends her own garden. But as a young woman, opportunities to garden were a little more limited.
I had to decide what I was going to do when I left school. And of course, all I knew I wanted was an outdoor life. But this was wartime, so I said, well, a land army is much more an outdoor life, I'm going to do that. And so that's how I got into it. It was quite a hard life, and you were working all day. Each student would have a strip of land to hand dig, and it had to be perfectly level. Miss Havergal was a perfectionist, and because she was so enthusiastic, you believed that perfection could be achieved. You just worked for it and you didn't mind, because it gave you a great sense of fulfilment.
After graduating, Mary returned to Waterperry to lecture and develop more of the gardens. And, like Miss Havergal, she brought new boundaries too when she became the first female presenter of Gardener's World.
Well, we've had a really terrible winter, but not everything has suffered. We've got some really gorgeous pussy willows here, making us think that spring is coming at last.
Mary and the rest of the staff at Waterperry feel very much the custodians of Miss Havergal's vision for the garden. And her prized herbaceous border has been lovingly tended for over 50 years.
Mary, you've been associated with Waterperry for a very long time, but what were the principles you used to create these beautiful borders?
Well, it was really the idea that was current in the 20th century, in that this was just purely herbaceous. No bulbs, no shrubs, no bedding. And so you had to get your display by how you arranged your plants and chose them. And it was basically 3 seasons. The first was May, June. But if they were going to be planted in the front, they'd got to look good after flowering, because you then had your next season, which was the June, July, delphiniums, the tall vibascums, phloxes, lovely time, wonderful.
All that colour and fireworks.
Yes, that's right. And so you put those so that as they grew up, they hid the early flowering. And then you had the late season, which was the September, October. So it was quite a tricky planning device. The idea behind it was that you did the work at certain times of the year.
Quite.
And if you've got bulbs there, they get in the way
Yes.
when you're digging in the autumn.
Quite.
You bring up a handful of bulbs.
That's right.
But it was great fun, yes. And Miss Havergal, this was her pride and joy. And she arranged it and she taught me how to do it. And then I looked after it for about 30 years too.
Well, it still looks good today, as I'm sure it did in those days.
Yes, well, they've carried on very, very well. They're using the same principles. And
Now, you worked with Miss Havergal. What was it like during that period?
well, it was hard work, of course, because she expected perfection. She could be very, very strict. Very strict. I mean, big farmers would be quite frightened of her. But on the other hand, she was very sweet to us, everyone. She was very caring for people. We all ate together in a dining room. We played together in the evenings, went on the river together. So you enjoyed it. You worked hard because she'd got such a lot of enthusiasm. She wanted it to succeed, and so you wanted it to succeed. And then you had a great sense of achievement when things did, when you grew a crop well or didn't.
Yeah, occasionally.
Not so good. I remember once forgetting to move a line, so that when the seedlings came up, they were V-shaped instead of parallel. But luckily, we'd remembered just in time and sewed the extra line in.
Excellent.
So before she could get out there, we were hoeing it off quickly.
Well, the cat's away, the mice will
Right,
play.
yes, absolutely.
One newer feature developed by Mary is the water lily canal on the eastern border of the garden. It looks fantastic now, but it's given Rob a few headaches.
So, Mary, what made you create this canal?
Well, we were finding that visitors were tending to stay in the bottom part of the garden.
Right.
And so we put in that semicircular bed with brilliant colours in it. But then that left this a rather empty space between the two. So I thought the canal would just join the two. But I didn't want anything too elaborate because you're looking out to the countryside.
To a
out
lovely
there.
landscape.
Yes, that's right. And so I didn't want sort of lots of fountains and statues and things.
Right.
So we kept it very low key.
Right.
But then it means you come across it almost unexpectedly.
And then it's quite exciting because you've got all these different water lilies.
That's right. Yeah, it's rather nice.
And what about maintaining it and looking after it?
Maintaining it, well, first problem we had is our tap water is quite limey.
Right.
Huge lime level issues. And as soon as we sorted that problem out, duckweed came in.
Yes.
So
Blimey.
I didn't realise Mary was setting me one challenge after another when she came up with the odd concept.
It's the principles. You've got to keep going back to those strong principles.
One of the principles we were given is that the water should rebalance. And so I took a dangerous thing last year where I thought, I'm not doing anything for 12 months.
Right.
And it's actually worked.
Yes.
And
They are.
Yes, yes.
You see, ponds naturally, given the right circumstances, will actually rebalance.
I don't put any tap water in anymore.
No.
I leave it to
No,
the
Yeah.
rain.
that's the trouble.
Well, you see, tap water, you've got ammonia, you've got fluorine, you've got chlorine, you've got all sorts of things. And they need to evaporate off. And though you've got a large surface area, you've still got to get it to evaporate off.
Yes.
You know, whereas Mother Nature,
Nice
she's,
slightly
it's
acid
not.
water.
Yeah. So I think, you know, sometimes doing nothing is the answer.
In this occasion, it absolutely was.
Yeah, yeah.
You need to train someone because then they get the ideas behind the work.
Absolutely.
They know what you're aiming at,
Yeah,
and that's the
yeah.
main thing, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I have to stop myself and listen to what Mary has said to make sure I keep repeating that and keep that ethos going on all the time.
And you see, and you will pass that on to the next person, and they
Yes.
will have it ringing in their ears.
Yes.
Yes.
Go on,
that's it.
let's have a walk.
Waterperry is such a special place to me, and countless others. I want to give a tribute to honour Mary's lifelong custodianship of Miss Havergal's legacy. So I've asked local artist Rachel Ducker, who sculpts with wire, to make a piece of artwork for the garden. Waterperry has featured heavily in her life too.
I used to take my son to Waterperry when he was very young. Really gorgeous to sit out there and have a cup of tea and walk around. And I like the ethos of the whole place being very spiritual and to do with kindness and giving. And you can feel that when you're there.
Rachel initially started as a jeweller before she moved on to wire sculptures.
I love trying to catch a moment. I sort of see my work as a bit of 3D photography in a way, because it's a snapshot of a moment is what I'm trying to catch. And that's why I try and get the energy of the movement with the hands, the hair, everything, just creating a scene, really.
Rachel's sculptures are featured at the Chelsea Flower Show and in gardens that have won a coveted gold medal, but creating one for Waterperry is very special.
I'm really thrilled that I'm going to have a piece of my work in the garden there, actually, because I've been there for so many years and I've had my work in the gallery there. It's just lovely that I'll have a piece that will stay there for however long it will. I'm really happy about that.
Protecting and caring for someone's legacy in one lifetime is no mean feat, but 25 miles west of Waterperry, an Oxfordshire landmark has been cared for by local people for the last 3 millennia. And the best view of what they care for is up in the sky. This beautiful creature is the world-famous Uffington white horse. Leaping across a hill over 800 feet high, it can be seen for miles around. It's not the only chalk figure carved into the British countryside, but at almost 400 feet long and 110 feet high, it's certainly the biggest. And dating back to the Bronze Age, it's the oldest too. Below the horse is a dramatic dry valley known as the Manger, with its sides rippled by the retreating permafrost during the last ice age. Legend has it that it's where the white horse descends to feed at night. Imagine arriving in this vale 3,000 years ago and seeing this majestic beast for the first time. The awe and the reverence it must have inspired.
Before the gods that made the gods had seen their sunrise pass, the white horse of the White Horse Vale was cut out of the grass.
But why the horse was carved into the hill still remains a bit of a mystery. There are burial mounds nearby, so a link to death and the spirits is possible. In fact, people still bring ashes of the deceased to scatter over the hill. National Trust Ranger Andrew Foley is entrusted with the upkeep of the White Horse, but he has his own theory about its origins.
It's not meant for human eyes, in my opinion. It's set on the side of this hill in Oxfordshire, one of the highest points. It faces the setting sun. It's positioned above a landscape that cannot be explained by ancient man, so everything points to it's an offering towards the gods, one of those gods being Epona, which was a horse goddess. So my theory is that this is an offering to that god, bring us good harvests, bring us fortune, bring us long life. That's what I think it is.
But why would the image of a horse be so meaningful to Bronze Age inhabitants of the Vale?
Horses were symbols of power and status. Most people were born, lived and died in the same village and hardly ever travelled at all. So if you've got a horse, you have to be somebody important. You have to be probably a chieftain or a high-class warrior. A white horse would also symbolise your power and status, because most native horses in the country were brown, dull, nags or cobs. White horses would have been arriving in the country through trade with Europe or beyond. So again, if you're that high status and you've got a white horse, it's pretty much like driving down the high street in a Ferrari instead of a Ford Fiesta.
Over the millennia, the white horse has attracted some unique folklore.
Well, here we're working on the eye of the horse. It's probably the most visited part of the horse that people come to look at. There is a couple of legends associated with it. Firstly, it is said that should a maiden stand in the eye of the horse, within 1 full year she will be with child. You take that as you will. The second legend is that should you stand in here and spin round 3 times, it will bring you good luck. But that really doesn't help us with the National Trust management. Obviously, we're trying to fight erosion everywhere across the horse, and that's why we have signs saying, please keep off. We want you to enjoy, but we'd like you to help us preserve it as well.
The horse is formed of deep trenches filled with crushed chalk. Countless visitors and rain washing the chalk down the steep hill means it has to have constant care, or the lines of the figure would quickly become obscured.
Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm pounding chalk back into the eye of the figure of the horse. It's a very labour-intensive job. There's no great technology to it, as you can see. Things probably haven't changed over the years. It's just extremely... we call it like painting the Forth Bridge. As soon as you've finished, you think you've finished, then it's time to start all over again.
But perhaps the greatest enigma surrounding this ancient white horse is that local people must have looked after it for it to have survived for 3,000 years. Whatever the reason for doing so, I'm so glad they did. As you fly over the county, you realise how quintessentially English and restrained the landscape is. And the next Oxfordshire garden I'm visiting wonderfully reflects that setting, Kingston Bagpues. Like Waterperry, it's a 20th century garden created by a formidable woman, and her legacy too is being guarded by the next generation.
It's a young garden, but viewed from above, you can just see how wide that herbaceous border is. Fantastic trees, marvellous planting, and some great landscapes.
Flying from the east, a stately sentinel of mature trees creates a natural avenue that leads to the house itself. On the north side lies a formal lawn trimmed by straight-edged paths, encompassing newly planted Portuguese laurel trees and an elegant fountain. Further north, informal paths lead you through the trees and shrubs into the parkland. This isn't a garden that screams in your face. It has a softer voice which gently encourages you to stroll within it. It was started by well-to-do spinster Morley Rayfell, who bought Kingston Bagpues in 1939 and spent the rest of her life developing her beloved garden. Plans were laid out, plants were bought, and a lifetime's work of creating a garden begun. She travelled extensively, visiting gardens around the world and bringing back plants to see if they could work at home. She was determined to create a garden of her own. After her death in 1976, the gardens became a little less loved. Thankfully, Virginia Grant and her late husband inherited and began to restore the garden to its former glory.
Hi, Virginia.
Hi, Christine, lovely to see you.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Now, what are you up to?
Well, I'm just sort of slightly doing a gentle trim,
Okay.
more than a sort of hard prune on these Portuguese laurel.
Is that just to balance them up
It's
a
just
bit?
to balance them up. If you look at them all, they're not all grown evenly.
Yeah.
But also, I want it to be so that next year's flowering wood isn't all cut off.
Okay.
Which is what I think is going to be done if you cut them into a lollipop.
So it's just short back and sides?
Yeah, pretty much so. Pretty much so.
Can I give you a hand?
Yeah, I'd be delighted, absolutely delighted.
So where do you get your inspiration from?
Well, I'm very influenced by Marley Rayfell because I feel this is her garden. I'm custodian, not just of the house, but the garden as well.
Right.
I've got all her invoices when she did her major planting right into the 60s and early 70s. They actually did plans for the planting. I've only got one of them, sadly. I don't know what happened to the other.
But talking about Marley, wasn't she inspirational for the herbaceous border?
Absolutely, yes. I think it was in full bloom and it was tended throughout the war years. I think it was probably the only bit of the garden which was as a garden rather than producing fruit or vegetables.
Right, well, there's bits to do, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a lot to do.
Let's have a look.
We haven't had the kindest summer, unfortunately.
Well, there's quite a lot of deadheading to be done here, isn't
Yeah,
there?
sadly. It's just not as good as it should be, simply because it's been so dry these last few weeks.
Well, you know, some years you get a long display, don't you? In other years,
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
much shorter. So what state was the garden in when you actually arrived here?
The herbaceous border here essentially had 4 plants in it.
So a limited palette?
A limited palette, absolutely. So there were great losses here in the hard winter of, you know, 81, 82.
Yeah.
And we sort of set about the restoration of the gardens to realising a little bit what Marley Rayfield had done and what we would like to go on doing. Right. So we've taken quite a lot back into the garden, and I'm still doing it.
But what was Marley like as a person?
Well, I don't have any first-hand knowledge because, sadly, I never knew her, although I grew up very close. My mother met her on a few occasions and said she was delightful and passionate about her garden. And she travelled a lot before the war, between the wars, but she didn't really travel nearly as much afterwards. I think it was, you know, she wanted to see what was happening here and have her finger on the pulse. And she was...
What's the overall plan for the garden?
I think she had one where she wanted to plant the plants that she'd seen on her travels, right, and to have them.
And have them she did. Further down at the end of the border, an exotic Persian silk tree has just come into bloom. Marley may have seen this tree on her travels around Asia, but it was first introduced into Europe in the mid-18th century by an Italian nobleman. In the wild, the tree tends to grow in dry plains, sandy valleys and uplands, but it's planted as an ornamental feature in parks and gardens for its stunning foliage and silky pom-pom flowers. Its Persian name means night sleeper because the leaves slowly close during the night. To look this good, maybe you need a little beauty sleep.
We say the more you travel, the more you go and look at plants in the wild, the better informed and the more aware you are of the peculiarities that Mother Nature can throw up. And I think those early days of travel really set the palette and the tone for British horticulture. Because we had no reference point before then.
I'm sure. She wanted a garden where you could walk at any time of year and you could find something of interest, and I think that's really important.
But it's so easy to do when people say, you know, how do you get 12 months of the colour? You visit a garden centre one day every month and buy something in flower, and you do it on every month the same for the year. And at the end of the year, you've got 12 months of the colour.
I've never thought of that, but that's a really, really good idea.
So what's going to happen to the garden in the long term? You know, do you have kids that are interested?
I've got 2, Elizabeth and Alexander. I have to say they're teenagers and they're not really keen to... They're not interested in the niceties of gardening, but they're very interested in the whole vista.
OK.
So, bearing in mind what I was like at their age, you know, I think you've got to have that sort of opportunity and chance to grow into it.
Yeah, and you see, what's interesting about youngsters is that often they don't actually say what's in there.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Exactly.
you hope that as a gardener you've sown a seed, and you probably have sown the seed, but it may lay dormant for a hell of a long time, and then one day it might bloom.
Like gardening, the seeds of a good idea can grow anywhere. And 24 miles southeast of Kingston Bagpuws, on the calm waters at Henley-on-Thames, the idea of a boat race between the great universities of Oxford and Cambridge came to fruition in 1829. It eventually became the world's most famous regatta, Henley. Eloise Chapman is curator at the River and Rowing Museum on the riverbank.
Henley's always benefited from the fact that it sits on a stretch of the river that's very navigable up to London. And with the introduction of locks during the 17th and 18th century, the amount of trade really increased, and size of vessels on the river really increased as well. During this time there was an increasing interest in everything maritime, and this is due in no small part to Jerome K. Jerome's book Free Men in a Boat. And around this time there was another travel book which came out by John McGregor called 1,000 Miles in a Rob Roy Canoe, where he wrote about his adventures in his purpose-built canoe. And we have one of these first canoes called a Rob Roy that was built for him in the museum.
The first Oxford-Cambridge boat race took place here after 2 old school friends who went on to opposing universities were rowing together when they came up with a plan for an 8-oar race. They chose Henley-on-Thames because this stretch of the river was nice and straight. In the inaugural race, it was Oxford who won the day, and they have the winning boat in the museum.
The boat is very different to the boats you have today. It's completely made of wood, it's incredibly large, incredibly heavy. It doesn't have outriggers for the oars, and it also has static seats. So today you have a sliding seat, which makes rowing a lot easier, whereas these are completely static.
The good people of Henley quickly realised that messing about on the river could be very lucrative, and the first regatta was established in 1839. Eventually increasing from a one-day event to the 5-day event it is now. But despite advancements in its duration, some rules weren't so progressive.
Perhaps the most shocking rule was that no entrant was allowed to have undertaken any task that was considered menial, so nothing like a mechanic or an artisan where they'd be working for a wage.
The regatta was intended for amateur oarsmen, and it enforced strict guidelines, but they didn't mention middle-class jobs like doctors, lawyers and accountants. So, in all but name, there was a class bar. The offending rule was dropped in 1937, but when it comes to sartorial tradition, some rules are holding fast.
Regatta has quite a strict dress code, and for men this includes blazers or jackets and flannels, and blazers are quite a big part of rowing, and they came out of rowing. They were known as blazers because they were so bright. Women at the regatta are always expected to wear a dress, and the dress has to be below the knee, otherwise they will be told to leave.
No need for dress code back at Waterperry, thank heavens, although these island beds will have you wearing a smile. Much of the garden we see today was under the guardianship of Miss Havergal's former pupil, Mary Spiller. Mary was the first ever presenter on Gardener's World and has cared for Waterperry for over 50 years.
Have a little pew.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's very nice.
To thank this modest woman, I've asked local artist Rachel Ducker to make one of her miniature wire sculptures. It will sit in this particular part of the garden that's filled with alpine plants Mary's particularly fond of.
What we thought would be nice is to leave something here to recognise the woman that really started it off. And what we did was asked a local artist that equally loves Waterperry to create a modern piece of art that would reflect Miss Havergal and the principles. And there we go. Way.
How lovely, and she's holding a strawberry.
Absolutely.
Delightful.
So
Yes.
there we are, Miss Havergal with a strawberry. The
Yes.
excellence
Yes.
of the standards. You've got to have principles to
Yes.
produce a strawberry like that.
Yes, she was quite a woman. Quite a woman.
I wholeheartedly agree, Mary. She was quite a woman. It's been so uplifting to see these Oxfordshire gardens from high in the sky, and to know that both the memory of the women who created them and the gardens themselves are safe in the hands of their new custodians. With that kind of protection, these young gardens might last as long as that ancient white horse.